Can we talk about specific Christian denominations in the United States that are, would we say, are Zionist denominations, or is it basically church by church, or how does it work? I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
for example,
right,
Baptists are
right,
most of my friends are Baptists, and
right.
most of them seem to
Yeah, it
are
seems to be very
Zionists.
common among Baptists. And so I guess what you, in general, is just like what we used to call and we still do to some extent, the mainline denominations, the Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians and whatever. They're not. Um, it's not like it doesn't exist at all within them, but it really has had very little impact on the
But they're
Catholics.
also, is it
But
fair to say that Lutherans, Catholics, they're not Zionists, but they don't really pick a side though either,
yeah,
right? They're just kind of like
well,
whatever, and they don't
well,
realize the problem with
yeah. Well, I think
with
there's two
Zionism
things.
itself.
Yeah, well, there are two things here. Is first of all, is that they really they've been in decline for a long time, like maybe ever since the 50s or 60s. They
When you
used
say
to be,
they, you're talking
yeah, the
about
mainline
Catholics.
churches.
Okay.
Yeah, right. The mainline churches. Before when you talked about Christians, that's what we were talking about, and the fundamentalists. They were there, but they were a minority. Okay, dispensationalism was, a real force within that community, or within that group of Christians. But it was very much a minority, when you looked at the whole spectrum of American Christianity. But that's now, these days, it's not so true. It's just that again, the mainline denominations just don't have the numbers that they used to have. They don't have they kind of losing their identity. They don't really stand for much of anything, or that's the way it often looks to people. So now, but in the meantime, the fundamentalists and the evangelicals have grown in force, and yeah, that's not so much particular. It's sort of a flavor of Christianity. A lot of it can be just non-denominational. Not just kind of independent churches. Some of these mega churches. One example, like one of the best known Christian Zionists is John Hagee. I think he's in New Mexico, has a mega church, and he's been a real powerful advocate of Christian Zionism. So yeah, you kind of find it among outside of those. You would call it sort of non-traditional churches. Some of them like the Baptists that were established in the 19th centuries. Others that are just are of even more recent origin, but in general that they have this kind of evangelical or fundamentalist flavor.
Okay. Yeah, it's Christianity is it's weird. It's strange for me because it's so fragmented now. I don't really even know what it fully means. When you're a Christian, because I mean, if you're a Baptist or non-denominational and you subscribe to Zionism, Christian Zionism, it's so different than something
Right.
like Orthodoxy or Catholicism, which I'm more familiar with.
Right.
You could argue that really Catholicism and Orthodox Christians are more akin to Islam than Orthodoxy and Catholicism would be to some of these non-denominational churches.
I think
non-denominational churches
you actually
or
can make
Baptist
that
churches.
argument. I think that there's actually a lot of truth to that. The differences are huge, but I think they're not as great as the differences between traditional Orthodox and.
I mean, it's almost like you
right.
need to. I almost feel like you need to divide Christianity into. I think a better delineating line would be whether that's a Christian Zionist denomination or not.
Yeah.
And that would help parse things a little bit easier to
Right.
understand. But
Right.
it seems like we're
Yeah.
not even allowed to delineate it because we're not really supposed to question it or talk about it. So the concepts of Christian Zionism arguing against it almost has this, because of we talk about Judeo-Christian values and all these things. It almost feels anti-Christian. They try to make it that way to kind of question Zionism. Because they're I think another big part of it is they're always invoking language from biblical language, which makes it feel like, oh, well, that's right. That sounds right. I don't really know the Bible that well, but they talk about Mount Zion and Zionism and all this, so it's got to be right. It's got to be
Right.
Christian.
Right. Well, often, again, they're quoting from the Old Testament, and it was something very well understood by Christians for many, many centuries until, John Darby, really, in the 19th century, that
Do you think it
Yeah,
would be
that
good?
that Old Testament, that was a chapter in the relationship between God and man. There was this particular people that God spoke to, and then He prepared them for the Messiah. But the Messiah came, and He found He was not the conquering king. He was born in a manger. Rode on the foal of an ass, and who was crucified. I mean, he was a suffering servant. That's one way to describe him. And and with him, there was a whole new relationship was established, not with a particular people, but with the whole world. I mean, that was very, very well understood until this new idea that came out of left field, developed and now has grown and now has become a real powerful force.
Maybe they need to add a little disclaimer on Bibles now to let people know, like, hey, the Old Testament, that's the history part.
Yeah.
This is the new part. Understand that it's good to
Right.
understand and study
Right.
the Old Testament's fine, but understand that, we
Let's
have
say
this
like
new covenant.
right, in Orthodoxy, we say like everything, because the Bible is it's a long, complicated book that covers centuries, and it is difficult to make sense of. The whole thing, the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I think like the life of Christ can kind of speak to people directly, but then how do we relate that to the rest of the Bible? That's a challenging question. So in Orthodoxy, we say, okay, we don't just try to figure it out individually, but we just accept the consensus of what we say of the church fathers, the greatest minds of the first several centuries of the church who discussed these things and debated it, and then these things are settled. And so, and pretty much like the Catholic Church carried that on too. And then in the mainline Protestant denominations like, Lutheranism and Methodism and so forth. So anyway, was saying, yeah, so actually that like an Orthodox study Bible will have that in there. There are all kinds of notes explaining, well, this is how the Old Testament, is related to the New Testament and so forth. Now like the Christian Zionists, there was actually one Bible in particular that played a very important role in spreading Christian Zionism, dispensationalism, and that was the Scofield Bible. And I think that was first published in 1909, and it had those notes that actually interpreted these particular prophecies in a particular way, according to the dispensationalist way of thinking. And those Bibles are out there. I mean, it's a very different, it depends on which Bible you read, which notes you go to. But a lot of people have those dispensationalist Bibles.
Yeah. It's really interesting that I feel like it's almost kind of coming true, this Armageddon thing, and it just all these three religions that are intertwined, that are all in Jerusalem, all holy lands for three people. But the thing is, before the idea of Zionism became mainstream, for the most part, they were living in relative peace in Palestine, in Jerusalem, right? I mean, there were periods throughout history where the Turks came and the Crusades and all these things.
Right. Yeah, there were times of great persecution, but there were Christian communities, fairly substantial Christian communities that survived all those centuries, and when the Jews began to start to settle in Israel and Palestine, they were a very significant part of the population. And
do you know how significant? Like, we're talking 20% or something?
Oh, it was I would say at least 25%. I think at one time, for example, Jerusalem was 50% Christian. And then certain places like Nazareth and Bethlehem were, almost entirely Christian. It wasn't that there were just a few individual survivors. So these were communities that had survived all those centuries. And there were persecutions. There certainly were, that carried out by the Muslims at different times. But in the last couple of centuries, like under the Ottomans, they, all in all they were there. They were protected. They weren't persecuted, kind of like Christians today in Syria. Their way of life was respected.
So, but not when Israel was formed, then it all changed.
Right. I mean, yeah, of course, a lot of those Palestinian Christians were victims of the Nakba, that great ethnic cleansing in 1947, 1948. And then, those who found themselves like in the West Bank, were persecuted just like, everybody else there on the West Bank, by the Israelis, by the Israeli Jews.
I just wish that, if Christian Zionists can understand that they're persecuting Christians as well. And they've destroyed Christianity probably, in the Middle East.
Right. They've shown very little interest in finding. Sometimes they're very surprised to find out that there are Christians there, and then, they've shown really very little interest. I remember reading about one group that was part of a tour, and they learned that there were Christians. They were very excited. Can we talk to them? And it was just like the tour guy said, "No, we're not going to let you talk to them. That's not part of the program."
Yeah, I had an interesting experience. I think it was in Nablus or Nazareth. I forget which town, but we were there with the tour guide, and we went to an Orthodox church. The priest was there, but the group that I was with, the tour guide and some other people, they were all Muslims. And they come in, and then the priest greets them and hugs them. They give them a kiss on the cheek. They greet them as brothers, and they also were solemn and bow their head. And the priest gave a talk, and I'm here with all these other Muslims listening to the priest, and I saw that connection, that unity between the Christians and the Muslims in there. They were there, and the talk, it was being interpreted for me because it was in Arabic, but it was just talking about how the Christians and Muslims, how we need to stick together, and and then something also about the great warlord Obama, during Obama's time. The whole thing, I was like, this is weird. I'm like, man, I need to record this. This will blow the mind of all my Baptist friends back home that I'm here in a Christian church with Muslims talking about the great warlord Obama oppressing them. It's like, it just, we're just so far removed. It's a shame that.
Right. Well, these people with this end times vision, they know nothing about these countries. They just know nothing. There was, it's interesting again in this book that there were dispensationalists that became concerned at different times. They were better informed and started to understand, oh, wait a second, there are people there and they're suffering and we can't ignore that. So there occasionally, there are kind of pangs of conscience and contrary voices, especially in the early years of dispensationalism. But I think those have been almost entirely silenced now. These people that are pushing this just completely ignorant and just uninterested in actually learning anything about what real Muslims and Christians in the areas are like.
Do you feel like Christian Zionism is on the decline in America?
Yeah, I don't think it is. It certainly seems to be flexing a lot of political muscle right now. We have the Speaker of the House, Kevin Johnson, is clearly a Christian Zionist.
Or Mike Johnson.
He just talks so. Oh, Mike Johnson. I'm sorry, Mike Johnson.
Kevin McCarthy was the one before he got him.
Okay, yeah. Okay, easy to do, right. Mike Johnson. And he quotes the Bible the way a dispensationalist does. Yeah, I don't know, like if the actual numbers, what surveys are showing. Again, we've talked about this, that like the support for Zionism is declining markedly among the younger generation. So that, again, may kind of bode ill for the future of Christian Zionism in this country. I mean, it may be that it is, but it's still a very powerful force, and maybe it's, more powerful than it ever has been. Again, we have the Speaker of the House is clearly a Christian Zionist.
Yeah, and I feel like there's not really an easy way to reach them, or, it's nice, positive trend to see the youth, amongst both Jews and Christians, I think, are not so open to the concept of Zionism. But it is very ingrained in the older generation. So maybe just will take some time and it'll slowly start to push out. But I think it's not a very easy thing to reach to. If you're a Zionist, you're going to be in that Zionist bubble. I feel like you can't really penetrate it very easily. Like I don't want to get in a conversation with them.
Right.
Because my neighbors are, they're very nice people and I like talk to them. But, when October 7th happened, they're, the mindset, we got to get rid of them all. And, God, this is God's plan. I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't want to get into this debate with you
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're my
Right.
neighbor and you're a nice person, and I
Yeah.
want to use your
Right.
pool during the summer. So please, let's don't.
Yeah. No, I know. Um, I think it's also, it's not a question of like, clearly like the religious component has become much more powerful within Zionism, like within Jewish Zionism. It used to be entirely secular, but we have to remind ourselves a lot of the most zealous supporters of Zionism among the Jews still are secular. A lot of the people with the power, and they're just as hard to reach as the religious Zionists.
I feel like it. I think.
And then there are, I think also we need to mention that a lot of the ultra Orthodox are actually anti-Zionist. There always were Jews who said, "Yeah, this is bogus. This is not this is not our understanding of what Messiah is not supposed to come this way through the efforts of secular Jews."
Right. I see videos of them in New York saying, like they don't represent Zionism, doesn't represent us.
Right.
They're out there.
Yeah. I think we have to recognize that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we need to kind of get better with these terms. Like Zionism for me is almost a separate religion then. It's like if you're a Zionist, it's almost like you're in another camp. And I think that's almost a better way to frame it. Like if you're Zionist, are you really Christian at this point? Like,
I would say, well, I'm not going to say
well, of course you accept Christ,
right.
but I mean,
I would say it's no question, like what we would call it a heresy, which is to say a really serious distortion of Christian teaching and understanding. And
right, I mean, just like saying, are Mormons Christians? They're their own thing, but Mormons they're super nice, they're harmless, and they're not trying to bring it about the end of the world. So I don't have as much beef. But I mean, the Zionism thing is just like I don't know. It's I feel like it should be classified. I like that the term is being thrown out more because we want to distinguish between just Jews and Zionists, and that term is becoming more mainstream. I think people are kind of slowly understanding what Zionism is, coming to the zeitgeist because of what's happening in the Middle East. More and more people are becoming aware of it. And I think it's important for people to classify Zionism as something completely separate from a whole separate camp. And this is a parasitic, corrupted version of whatever it attaches itself to, whether it be Judaism, whether it be Christianity. It's like, no, it's this parasite that's now attached to Christianity or attached to Judaism that's poisoning it, and we shouldn't assume that it is part of it. It's not the original thing anymore. It's not really Christianity. It's not really Judaism.
Right.
I think that's a better way to look at it.
Well, without a doubt, I can say that without a doubt, it's true for Christians. And then, as far as I think it's probably true for Jews too.
Right. We were just talking about the ultra-Orthodox Jews just saying this is a rejection. And even just what you're saying, like the Zionism, Christian Zionism predated Jewish Zionism. It's not like this is something that was, these are ancient religions. Right. But the concept of Zionism is really only like 150 years old.
Right. It's really very new. Right.
So it's like you said, it should be viewed as a heresy. It should be viewed, from all religions. It's like, no, this is just it's some apocalyptic, fetish that has been inserted into these religions. And that's kind of what I think it is. It is kind of just people that want to see Armageddon. It's exciting. And you can see how it would take hold too, because people love hearing about the end of the world.
Yeah.
If you're out the preacher ringing the bell and saying, everybody just don't worry, everything's gonna be fine. Keep on praying and take care of your. No, it's like hear that, but it's like, oh, it's coming. We gotta. Right. That's what gets attention. So if you're able to preach that, I think it can resonate, and you can. It's kind of a demagoguery type of behavior. You can convince your flock to give over more things for the end times when they know that something's apocalyptic. That's my opinion, anyways.
Yeah. I don't. It's hard sometimes to know what the motivations are, but it's real. It's a very, very serious distortion with horrific consequences. And, potentially those consequences could become, global. We'll see.
Yeah, but I think there is becoming an awareness. There is slowly a slow enlightenment for people that there's something parasitic about this relationship with Israel and the United States,
Oh
with
yeah,
Zionism
right,
but Zionism as well as
right.
just
Well, it's even
overall
more
is the
than
root of
right.
that.
Yeah, I would say like in the case of the relationship between Israel and the U.S., it's more than just parasitic. It's Israel.
Completely corrupted,
Yeah, it's
completely.
completely corrupted our foreign policy, and it's dominated our foreign policy in the Middle East, and that is a horrifying state of affairs, and has put us into a real serious fix right now.
Well,
Happy
I guess
Friday, right?
happy Friday. Yeah, okay. I guess we'll end it there. Okay, well, uh, all right. Let's get a little apocalypse talk for the weekend. Okay, all right. Well, we'll just go ahead and end it there then. All
Okay,
right. Thanks a lot, Dad. All right. Bye bye.
bye.